Welcome back, TikTakers! Today, we'll be traveling to the beautiful country of Cuba to learn about one of its most shocking legends. More specifically, we'll be visiting the town of Remedios, which is rich in myths and paranormal stories. So let's go back to the times of corsairs and pirates, when the legend of the Screamer of Cucuy is said to have taken place. Back in the 17th century, the town of Remedios was frequently sieged by pirates and corsairs, and the neighbors got used to it over time, but never stopped being afraid. Among them lived a young and very beautiful lady. She was tall, slim, and had big black eyes. Her skin was pale and her hair was jet black. In the year 1658, the French pirate Francis Colonel arrived to the town. He was known as Loloni and was the head of a fearsome group of pirates. They laid waste to everything in their path, wounding and killing people left and right. Then they all bursted into the house of the young pale lady and stole everything they could find. She then tried to hide and escape, but the pirate in charge managed to find her. And as soon as he saw her, he was immediately attracted to her incredible beauty. He had never seen anything like that before. Thus, he tried to convince her to join him and become his lover. However, she resisted with all her strength. The lady wanted nothing to do with those cruel pirates. She struggled as she tried to get away and managed to scratch the pirate's face and chest. The head pirate, completely dumbfounded at how a young woman like that could rebel against his mind, got furious. And without thinking it twice, he grabbed an axe and chopped off the head of that beautiful lady. The legend says that the body of the lady kept running around the place, carrying her bloody head in her hands. She would try to put her head in the right place while still being chased by the pirates. She ran for so long that she arrived at a very deep well situated in the zone of Cucuy. And as much as the pirates chased her, they couldn't catch her. They even searched for her in that deep well, but there was no sign of her. All they could see were the stains of blood the lady had left behind as she ran, and nothing more. However, who did see her again were the neighbors. The few people who managed to survive the pirates' pillage were now terrorized by the lady, who would come out of her hiding place 4 Fridays of the year. The first Friday of January, the Friday of Sorrows, the Holy Friday, and the Friday before Christmas. From then on, her story has been shared from generation to generation, and everyone says that the soul of the young lady has kept wandering around Cucuy for centuries. And those who had seen her could no longer think about anything else. She would abandon her hiding well, holding her chopped off head in her hands, wandering around while making terrifying groans. Every time she went out, she would do so at midnight and would walk around the town from north to south and from east to west, stopping in some specific places. Due to her loud and chilling groans, people started calling her the Screamer, and she became a recurring nightmare for both children and adults. They say that when her screams are heard, ill people would die, pregnant women would lose their babies, dogs would bark uncontrollably, and the sane would turn insane. And for years, the neighbors would cover themselves with white blankets and repeat the prayer, "May God help us, here comes the Screamer of Cucuy." Even nowadays, parents try to scare their children with this figure when they misbehave. And I don't know about you, but TikTak are terrified of this creature. Every time they walk down the street, they fear bumping into a beautiful lady with her bloody, chopped off head in her hands. Lunchtime had arrived at the company where I work, and I was heading to the dining room like every day. I was looking at a yellowish mess on my tray that I didn't know it was egg or potato when someone called my name. "Hey, Becky!" She was Mia, one of my co-workers. It's not that we were soulmates, but she was one of the few people I liked in that company. We always waited for each other on breaks and ate together in the cafeteria. So I turned around and walked away. I headed to their table. Samantha, another of the workers, was sitting next to her. They seemed to be discussing some half-secret topic because they were talking in a low voice, so that the other colleagues couldn't hear their conversation. Of course, I asked them. Mia waved her hands, putting tension on the matter. Haven't you heard the rumors? Another woman was attacked in the shopping center parking lot. I frowned in confusion. Again? I didn't know there was already more than one victim. After the 2 years that I was hospitalized for health reasons, I was quite far from the media. The two girls looked at each other and then at me in disbelief, as if I had missed the news of the century. Don't you know? According to what they say, she's the 4th victim in just 2 weeks. Since it still didn't mean anything to me, Mia began to explain. This all started a few weeks ago. The first victim was likely a young woman who was shopping at Walmart. It was almost dark when she left the mall, so there weren't too many people in the parking lot. I think it must have been right at the time of closing, when the supermarket no longer allows entry, but there are still the last customers putting their purchases in the trunk. Or at least, that's what I think. What I didn't know was that that famous criminal was hiding under cars. And all the victims attacked had been women and with a red car. Either they were his goal or a great coincidence. I shifted in my chair and swallowed the food in my mouth with difficulty. My car was also red, and I used to make my purchases at that same Walmart. My partner continued to recount the event, saying that the criminal was waiting under the car while the women calmly made their purchase. Once they arrived with the car full, they left the items in the trunk and then walked to the driver's door. But just when they were about to enter, rush! A hand shot out from under the car and cut both their heels with a knife. After the cut, the women fell to the ground, leaving them completely defenseless. That depraved man could do whatever he wanted with them because they couldn't flee. Oh, I hope he only did it to rob them and not to do anything else to them, Samantha exclaimed as she closed her eyes in anguish. I swallowed hard the next bite in my mouth and asked them how they found out. They quietly confessed to me that the person in charge of Walmart had told them. He was one of the few people who knew, because they didn't want the news to spread throughout the city and spread panic. In the days that followed, the mall killer became the #1 topic of conversation at our company. The rumor spread like wildfire. Everyone knew about him. I heard countless stories of people who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone. And although in my head I had created the idea that it was nothing more than an urban legend that some small group had invented to scare women, I couldn't escape with each new story and each new version of that murderer. Soon, I found myself looking under my car from afar every time I was in a supermarket parking lot. In the end, it happened to me in other places too. One night, I even had to look under the bed before I dared broach her. It was exasperating. I was upset with myself for letting the rumors get to me, even though I knew they weren't true. However, a few days later, I realized how wrong I was. During the last few days, I had avoided Walmart and had done my shopping in other shopping centers farther away. But that day, I decided to skip that nonsense, and since I didn't need much, I drove to my usual supermarket. When I finally left the mall, carrying shopping bags, I was shocked. It was night and everything was dark. In front of me, the parking lot was deserted. It wasn't unusual because it was close to closing time. The shocking thing was that I had lost track of time inside and I didn't know it was so late. With some anguish, I headed to my car. I tried to appear as confident as possible. If there was someone around, I didn't want them to see me as scared. To make matters worse, I noticed that the street lights I had parked under was broken. No matter how hard I tried, all I could see was darkness beneath my car. I felt my pulse quicken. My breathing became heavy with every step I took towards it. But still, I forced myself to walk slowly so as not to show any weakness. With a balancing act I could probably use at a circus, I somehow managed to get the car remote out of my bag, even though my arms were full. Although normally in these situations I close my eyes and run away, I kept creating stories in my head and imagining arms coming out from under the car. With a trembling hand, I pressed the button on the car remote. The trunk was open, but I still wasn't safe. Not caring if I crushed any delicate purchases, I quickly tossed the bags inside. And without closing the door, I immediately jumped back, putting a safe distance between me and my car. Meanwhile, I could clearly hear my pulse beating in my ears. I slowly crouched on the ground, I was finally able to see the underside of my vehicle. There was no one. An embarrassing laugh left my mouth, and I shook my head as I stood up. There was no one there. Of course not. How could I be so stupid? There was no Martha in the mall. Feeling like my heart was several pounds lighter, I walked back to my trunk and slowly closed it. Then I continued to the driver's door. There, without further ado, I opened the door. I was about to sit down when suddenly a scream echoed through the parking lot. I was frozen. That was the voice of a woman. She screamed shrilly until suddenly something drowned out her screams. For a few seconds that seemed like minutes, I began to weigh all kinds of possibilities, trying to choose the best one, without coming out wrong. What should I do? Should I escape and get to safety, or should I see what's going on? Help the woman? I closed my eyes for a few more seconds, even though I had already made a decision. The muffled screams came from another part of the parking lot. I had to turn a corner to see him. There, I saw a figure crouching on the ground next to one of the cars. When he noticed my footsteps, he raised his head, jumped up, and ran in the opposite direction. Almost immediately, the screams became louder again. "Help! Help me!" screamed the terrified woman who was lying on the ground where the figure had just crouched. I ran to her and asked what had happened to her, but she didn't have to answer. I knew as soon as I saw the blood on her feet. The man had cut her heels. The mall killer was real. And who knows what he would have done to the woman if I hadn't been there. Panicked that he might do something to me, I ran out of there, not before having called the emergency services and telling them what happened. That situation had made me very nervous and had removed my past traumas. I tried to breathe slowly several times and remember the advice I had been given at the center during my recovery. Everything was fine. I had gotten rid of that murderer and I had to celebrate. So I went to release tension with my favorite hobby. After feeling more relieved, I headed to a bar for a drink. That situation had left me with a dry throat. Finally, I found a place. A dark, gloomy place, but also deserted. The waiter was completely alone at one end, watching a football game. I sat at the bar and placed the bag I had with me next to me. I ordered a soft drink. Before the owner had a chance to return to his game, another customer walked in. "Give me a double whiskey." The customer was a thin, long-haired man in his 40s, with wrinkles and dirty clothes. He was wearing a coat and a bag, black, bulky, very similar to mine. As I watched him, he carefully placed it on the adjacent stool and reached for his glass. He threw his head back and swallowed. I could see the movement of his Swedish neck. Then he pushed the empty glass away while he asked the owner for another glass of whiskey and took out a handful of bills from his pocket. The waiter's expression was a mix of grimace and smile, but when he saw the bills raining down on the bar, he smiled. He shrugged his shoulders and refilled the glass with alcohol. I knew what he was thinking. If he asked me for beer, I'd tell him to go to hell, but he's paying for whiskey, so hold on. The second glass came down almost as quickly as the first, and he ordered a third. The waiter came back, served him, grabbed the money, and put it in the cash register. I watched the third glass disappear. The stranger's neck was now bright red. 3 glasses of whiskey in 2 minutes also made him lose his tongue, and he began to grumble and start a conversation with me. "Always the same football. God, what kind of hobby is that? Who can be entertained by watching a group of monkeys fighting to kick a ball?" I answered that it was a hobby, but that we were all different. We each had different ways of entertaining ourselves. Maybe he understood me, maybe he didn't, but he nodded his head. Then he asked me what I thought about hunting and fishing. I told him I had no opinion about it. He laughed and joined the conversation. He told me that it was one of his favorite hobbies, although for many it had become just another form of murder, taking a gun and killing an animal, or putting a hook in a fish and making it suffer for the simple fact of enjoying the hobby of fishing and throwing it back into the sea. I was interested in his reasoning and asked him if killing was justified if it created pleasure in the person. He looked at his empty glass and told me it depended on who. If you made someone who no one would miss without family, like a beggar, it wasn't right, but the person could do it without anyone noticing. No one would miss him and no one would put the city on alarm. I leaned forward and looking at him intently, I asked, "And do you think someone could do something like that?" He didn't look at me, just looked at his bag before answering. "Well, I was thinking about a criminal who used to do it, here in the city too. But that was about 2 years ago. Nothing has been heard from him again." I asked him if he knew who he was, and he said no, that no one knew him. And that was the good thing. That's why he had always gotten away. The police had gone crazy trying to find him. They assumed he was someone from the city, but those were just assumptions. They never had the slightest clue as to his whereabouts. The criminal found some unfortunate person or lured a homeless person into an alley. He promised to give them a bottle of something, and then he cut off their heads. I stood up and reached for the bag. The man laughed and told me not to be afraid. He was sure that the guy was no longer in town. He had gotten tired of the area, or maybe they were about to catch him, and decided to walk away. Afterwards, he came very close to me, so much so that I felt threatened, and he told me, "People have the right to have hobbies, don't you think?" I opened my mouth to answer him, but before I could do so, I heard another noise, the hum of a siren on the street. The man at the bar raised his head. The three of us had realized that they were coming there. The man jumped to his feet and headed for the door. I ran after him and told him, "Hey, don't forget your bag." Without even looking at me, he grabbed the plastic bag and left with a hasty step, getting lost in an alley between 2 nearby buildings. In a moment, he disappeared. I stood at the door of the bar as the siren sounded closer and closer, making my ears hurt. A patrol car stopped in front of me and another behind me, but neither of them stopped the engine. 2 police officers got out and looked at all sides of the road. Inside the bar, they looked at me. Then they asked me if I had seen a man who looked unkempt, thin, with long hair and dirty. I had to tell him the truth, of course. "Yeah, he left here a minute ago." They asked me which direction, and I pointed between the 2 buildings. One of the police officers gave orders to the 2 patrol cars, and they started and headed to the direction I indicated. The other 2 police officers stayed in the bar asking us questions. One of them was the sergeant. They escorted me inside and told me it was the mole killer. Some companions had followed him secretly without uniform to go unnoticed. I took a deep breath, letting the police officers hear it. I told them I had talked to him while I was drinking my soda, but I had no idea he was a criminal. One of the police officers looked at my bag and remembered that the notice was that the murderer also had one with him. The sergeant asked me if I had noticed if he had taken it or left it there. I nodded to him that he had taken his bag with him. A few minutes later, the police officer's walkie rang. They were his companions who had managed to catch the criminal.
Enemy down!
Unfortunately, in the struggle to capture him, he had been injured by one of the police officers while protecting himself, and the criminal had died. The sergeant snorted. That was a big problem, and he would have to give a lot of explanations to the judge. But finally, all those crimes in the city were over. Shortly after, another police officer entered with a bag. The sergeant took it from his hands and placed it on the bar. "Was this the one he had?" he asked me. I nodded, feeling like my voice was sticking in my throat. I turned around. I didn't want to see how the sergeant opened the bag, nor did I want to see their faces when they looked inside. But naturally, I heard them. I think 2 of them got dizzy. There was a human head. I gave the sergeant my official statement as he requested. They took note of everything and made me sign. I told him about the conversation with a stranger. The whole theory of murder as a hobby, the idea of choosing unfortunate people as victims because no one would miss them. I told him that I didn't think he was being serious. It was just the ramblings of a person who had gone too far with alcohol. The sergeant replied, "He was probably telling you the way a murderer's mind works. 2 years ago, several murderers emerged, but then he stopped killing. I think he left town when things got tough. Then he felt the need to start over, and everything agrees that it was him. That murderer and the one from the shopping center were the same person." I imagine he noticed my expression because he rested his hand on my shoulder. "Forgive me, I understand how you feel. You are in great danger talking to him. you've probably been with the smartest psychopathic killer who ever lived. Consider yourself lucky. I nodded and headed to the door. I agreed with the sergeant about the risk taken and about the most intelligent of the psychopathic murderers in the world. Well, more like murderer. I also agreed how lucky I was. I mean, when, at the last moment, the mall criminal ran away from the tavern, and I made the switch and handed him my bag with the head I had just cut off. It was lucky for me that he could never notice that I had exchanged my bag for his. Everyone attributed my crimes to him. Now, I must stop again for a while. I must not raise suspicions. Juanito was 7 years old, and since his birth, he had not stopped misbehaving. As a baby, he would not stop crying, and when he became aware of it, he began to break everything in his path. At the age of 3, he started school, and everything got worse. He began to insult his parents and teachers. He was expelled because he often hit other children. His parents were completely desperate. They didn't know what to do with him. Despite the scoldings and punishments, Juanito never learned his lesson. With each passing year, he became a worse person and enjoyed hurting those around him. For that reason, his mother often threatened him that if he continued with this bad behavior, the Cucuy would come to take him away and he would never be able to return. The boy, as it sounded like a fairy tale to him, did not have the slightest effect on what he was told. He continued to misbehave and disrespect his parents constantly. But one night, the mother was awakened by loud screams. It was coming from the room where her son was sleeping, so she quickly got out of bed and ran to the bedroom. When she arrived, what she saw took her breath away. A hairy and very bad-looking figure was covering her son's mouth. Within seconds, before she could react, it carried him on its back and took him away. Just then, the woman started screaming for help. Her husband, who was asleep, woke up and went quickly. But it was too late. The thing had jumped out of the window with their son in its arms. They could only watch it disappear into the forest behind. That was the last time they saw Juanito. They never heard from him again, despite looking for him with all their might. This is one of many stories surrounding the Mexican legend of the Cucuy. This figure is not known by the same name in all countries. In Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Cuba, Uruguay, and others, it's known as Cuco. In Spain, Costa Rica, Colombia, and many others as Cucu. Call him one way or another, the story is common in all parts of the world. It is a figure that has been passed down from generation to generation and whose purpose is to scare children who misbehave or do not want to sleep. He's usually described as a terrifying being, very short in stature, with lots of hair all over his body, especially his hands and large, very bright eyes. It is also said to have exaggeratedly large ears and teeth as sharp as those of a lion. This creature will never appear during the day. It lives at night and hides in the closet or under the bed to, at the right time, take sleeping children. It is believed that the destination is a lair he has in the mountains, and unfortunately, the children will end up cooked to serve him as food. His figure is so well known all over the world that I am sure you have all heard a lullaby about him. Sleep, child, sleep now. The Cucuy is coming and will eat you. Although after so much time, most people say that this figure does not exist and it is simply a game to torment the little ones, several testimonies contradict it. One of them states that he has a traumatic memory of when he was a child. He would often misbehave, and his mother would tell him that one day the Cucuy would pull his feet at night. He simply laughed and settled down to sleep. But the next day, when he woke up, he had big scratches on his feet. So be careful, TikTakers. We don't know if it is true or not, but in any case, better safe than sorry, don't you think?
Hello again, horror lovers. We hope you're prepared for another terrifying video. Today, we'll be sharing with you a story which took place in a small German town in the 16th century. This town had just about 200 inhabitants, so everyone knew everyone else in this place. They used to organize parties in the central plaza, which everyone in town would go to. At the time, that was the best way to stay up to date too. One day, in one such party, 3 unknown women suddenly appeared. They were young and looked like pretty nice people. They introduced themselves and said they had just moved there to escape from their hectic lives in the city. They weren't welcomed with much enthusiasm at first. However, shortly after arriving, they opened a new school, which helped them win over the people's trust. There, they taught children to write, draw, and solve math problems, and the parents in the town were delighted with this. Some even asked the women for private classes for adults. For 2 months, the town was filled with happiness, until a fateful night when the mayor's son disappeared. All the townsfolk helped search for him. Some looked around town, while others went to the neighboring towns, asking if they had seen him, but with no luck. After a long time of trying to find him, the townsfolk gave up. The mayor's family was devastated, but the disappearances had just started. Half a year later, the baker's daughter suffered the same fate. Something strange was going on. After those seemingly nice women had arrived, and thus, the townsfolk, who still distrusted those women, put in charge a man to spy on them. Spying through the women's window, the man saw 2 of them talking with an unknown elderly woman. When did she get there? And where was the 3rd woman of the group? He didn't see her come out. That elderly lady was sitting in a chair, and was so old she could barely move. Suddenly, one of the young women brought a huge cauldron into the room. With the help of the 2nd woman, both grabbed the elderly lady and placed her inside of it, and with a bowl, they collected a strange red liquid from the bottom and poured it on top of the lady. In a few seconds, the old woman magically became young again, but she actually transformed into the 3rd woman. Flabbergasted at what he had just witnessed, the man rushed to the mayor to tell him what he saw, and a gathering was summoned at the plaza without the witches knowing. After the man told everyone what he had seen, some of the townsfolk went looking for wood to make a stake, while other townsfolk, including the baker, looked for weapons to capture the witches. They broke into the witches' house by knocking down their door and surrounded them. And when the baker went to see what was in the cauldron, he bursted into tears. In that strange red liquid floated his daughter's head. The townsfolk tied up the 3 witches to a huge stake in the middle of the town's plaza, and once immobile, the witches confessed their sins. They would bathe in the blood of murdered children to turn young again. When the stake's wood was set on fire, their young appearance vanished, and the 3 turned back into old hags with huge warts on their faces. Engulfed in flames and among cries of pain, one of the witches yelled before dying, "We'll be back!"
Miss Clemencia was an elderly woman popular for her healing abilities. More specifically, her ability to heal people's bad habits and behavior. She was able to heal alcoholism, spoiled children, envy, and much more. Nobody knew what her methods were, and she never allowed anyone to see her working. Only the ones to be treated would go into the workroom with her, to then leave that room not remembering what happened. However, Miss Clemencia was the best at what she did. All the people she treated would come out of her workplace with no more bad behaviors. The neighbors never bothered to ask her how she did it, since her results spoke for themselves. However, the strangest thing was that she never charged anything for her treatments, saying that she didn't need money and that her needs were already taken care of. And thus, this resulted in even more people asking her for help. One day came to her house a man with his son. The little one had developed very bad behaviors over the years. He was disobedient, would lie a lot, and would even steal other people's things. The man and his wife didn't know what else to do to change his behavior, and so he decided to ask Miss Clemencia for help. In that moment, she didn't say anything. She stopped to look closely at the boy, thoroughly observing him as if she was analyzing him. The face of the boy, and even the father's, showed a bit of nervousness due to her attitude. And then Miss Clemencia said, "Come with me, boy." She grabbed the boy by the arm and dragged him into her workroom. The boy struggled trying to free himself and cried, begging his father for help. He didn't want to be alone with her. However, the father clenched his fist, trying to be firm and trusting that his son would change for the better with Clementia's treatment. "Now, no matter what you hear and no matter what happens, you must not go into the room. You must wait outside," said Miss Clemencia to the father. After those words, she slammed the door shut. A few minutes passed in absolute silence. The father, sitting on a couch, looked at the floor as he was lost in thought. As hard as he tried, he couldn't imagine what could she be doing to his son in there. And soon, deafening screams started being heard. His son was the one screaming, and it sounded as if they were tearing out his organs. The father desperately wanted to rush to the door and open it, but he remembered Clementia's warning. Tears started running down his face as he heard how his son suffered and couldn't do anything to stop it. Shortly after, the son's screams of pain changed into different voices. Now it sounded as if different people were screaming instead of his son. And then, complete silence. Everything became quiet once more. After a few minutes, Miss Clemencia came out with the son in her arms. He was unconscious. Scared, the father got up to see how he was. "How's my little one? What did you do to him?" "Don't worry," answered the elder. "Your son is fine. He just needs to rest for a bit. Healing him wasn't easy, but I did it." Miss Clemencia then went back into the room and grabbed 3 big black bags. They seemed to contain something living inside. They kind of looked like cats, but the noises they produced didn't sound like any domestic animal. The elder struggled to contain the 3 bags when, out of a sudden, one of them broke out a little and the father could see how a claw was peeking out of the bag. "What is that? Do you need help?" No, get away!" yelled the elder. "These are the ones that were inside your son, the ones who caused you so much trouble. Grab your son and go back home. I'll deal with this." The father didn't ask any more questions and took his son out of there. 2 days later, the man went back to Miss Clemencia's house in order to thank her for her service. His son's behavior had changed completely. He no longer lied, he stopped stealing, and became obedient and well-behaved. He was amazed at what Clemencia the healer had achieved. When he arrived, he found her preparing lunch. "I'm sorry to interrupt you, ma'am. I see that you're making lunch. I just wanted to give you something as a thank you for healing my son. I know you never ask for money, but this might still be useful for you, so please take it." The man left a few bills on her table, but Miss Clemencia said she didn't want them, and that thanks to the service she provided for people, her needs were taken care of, and she could feed herself. The elder was stirring her food when suddenly the same claw the father had seen peeking out of that bag started peeking out of the pot. He then understood what was happening and wanted to escape out of there. "Wait!" yelled the elder with a smile on her face. "They tell me that you have a terrible smoking addiction and you haven't been able to overcome it. So please, come with me." Ada was the daughter of a high-ranking officer in the German army, known for being one of the most ruthless officers in the battlefield. He lost his life the same day his country declared defeat. Little Ada had very vague memories of the time her father was actually with her. She was entirely raised by her mother, and her father lied to her all her life, telling her that he was just traveling and that one day he would come back to see her. He said he was a very busy entrepreneur and was working very hard to send in money. Ada also loved to spend hours looking at the photo at her house's entrance, where the 3 of them appeared smiling like a happy family. She wished to experience that so much that each morning she would ask her mom if there were any news about her dad. Then one night, when Ada was 9 years old, her mother had to rush out after she was informed of something terrible. Ada's uncle had suffered from a heart attack and was hospitalized because of his critical condition. Little Ada had never been alone in the house and even shared her bed with her mother to feel protected. And even though she was scared, she convinced herself that her uncle would get better and her mom would come back pretty soon. However, later that night, Ada heard steps coming from the hallway. "Mom?" she asked, but nobody answered. She thought it must have been her imagination, but even then, she completely covered herself in her blanket to feel safer. A while later, steps started being heard again, and this time around, they felt as if someone was running from one side of the house to the other. Ada took a deep breath and got up to carefully take a look. At the other side of the hallway, Ada saw a boy her age looking directly at her with a very serious expression. His face was pale, and he was wearing pajamas with blue and white stripes. Moreover, she was shocked at how the boy wasn't wearing any shoes. She asked the boy who he was and how he got in, but he didn't answer and didn't move a muscle. A few seconds later, he started walking slowly towards Ada, and as he walked, he was leaving red footprints on the floor. Little Ada was paralyzed. She felt how her arms and legs were not responding and her entire body was shivering. And once in front of her, the boy grabbed Ada's hand and placed it right on his chest full of holes, from which huge amounts of blood were pouring out. He then leaned closer and whispered in her ear, "Your father shot me. He did this to me. I will be walking around this house every night, and when you least expect it, I will attack you."
How are you, horror lovers? Today we travel to Mexico to bring you the legend, the Street of the Lost Child. It was the year 1659, and Mr. Adrian de Villacaña, a rich and powerful man, traveled from Europe to America with his little son Lauro, after the death of his wife. When he arrived in Nueva España, what we now know as Mexico, he bought a large house and hired several servants. After a year, Mr. Villacaña was diagnosed with a rare but serious illness. But what scared him was not death, but leaving his son completely alone. So he decided to find a new wife as soon as possible. Many women presented themselves to Mr. Adrian, but none managed to impress him until he met Mrs. Elvira. The man fell in love with her, and since he knew he had little time, he decided to ask her to marry him 3 days after meeting her. The woman quickly went to live with them. However, the boy didn't feel comfortable with her. He asked his father to throw that woman out of the house, warning him that she was bad. But the man, believing that it was still difficult for the little boy to accept someone taking the role of his mother, encouraged him to get to know her better. Months passed, and the situation with Elvira and Lauro didn't improve. They argued all the time. The stay in the house became unbearable with the screaming, until finally one day everything was filled with silence. Something had happened. The boy had disappeared. It was night when the servants told Mr. Adrian that they couldn't find the little boy. Villacaña told his wife that their son was missing. However, the woman barely turned to look at him, replying in a despotic and rude manner that she didn't care. Don Adrian was horrified, but at that moment the most important thing was to find the little boy. So without wasting time, he organized a search group. They all went out with torches at night, desperately shouting the child's name. Weeks passed and Lauro didn't appear. The man was more distressed every day. However, his wife acted as if nothing had happened, walking through the streets with her expensive dresses and with a perverse smile. That same afternoon, the man began to feel much worse when the expected tragedy occurred. Mr. Adrian died without having found his little one. From then on, Mrs. Elvira remained the sole heir to all his wealth. However, no one loved her. Everyone blamed her for the tragedies that had happened in her house. No one went to her parties or visited her, which caused Elvira to fall into madness. The years went by until one day, while one of her maids brought her breakfast, Elvira began to yell at her that she hadn't killed the child. Seconds later, after a horrible fit of madness, the lady threw herself out the window. At that moment, a key fell to the floor. The maid grabbed it, and together with her coworkers, they went one by one through all the furniture in the house to see where that key was from. Suddenly, a door that had always been closed opened by itself, and immediately a horrible plague invaded the environment. Inside there was a trunk. They went over and tried the key. The object split open and the servants cried out in terror. Inside was little Lauro with his hands tied and his mouth covered with one of Mrs. Elvira's handkerchiefs. From then on, no one wanted to enter that place, and the street was nicknamed the Street of the Lost Child.
The Yacumama, also known as Mother of the Water, is a popular mythological creature in Peru. It's a snake similar to the anaconda, but with a much larger size, reaching more than 50 meters in length and with a head 2 meters wide. It lives in the water, preferring the mouth of the Amazon River in the lagoons near the river. Legend says that the Yacumama rested in a lake with clear and calm waters in a fairly hidden area, so no one used to appear there. However, one day, a fisherman arrived by chance looking for new places. His surprise was immense. He had never seen such clean and serene waters. The man thought there would be many fish there, so he threw the nets into the lake while rubbing his hands, imagining the fortune he would get. But soon after, his boat began to shake. At first, he didn't care. He thought it was some current, but the jolts were getting bigger and bigger, which made him alarmed. The man picked up the nets when the water began to form an intense eddy in front of him. And in the middle, emerging from the depths, he saw a giant snake with yellow eyes and a very long tongue at sand. The fisherman dropped the nets and began rowing with all his might to escape. Desperate, he prayed to the god Inti for help, who instructed him to row towards Lake Titicaca. As he advanced towards there, the vegetation that bordered the river began to grow exaggerately, covering his path. And meanwhile, the Yacumama followed him underwater. When the man believed that his end had come, 4 tapirs came from the shore and jumped into the water, fighting with the snake. Then the Yacumama turned around and the vegetation that blocked the path returned to its previous state. The fisherman took the opportunity to escape from there and managed to reach the other side, where he was finally safe. The man returned without fish, but he had kept the most valuable thing: his life. This popular Peruvian legend defines the Yacumama as a kind of Loch Ness monster in a snake version. For a long time, the indigenous people preferred to respect the calm waters of these lakes in order not to encounter this creature. It is said that it can launch large jets of water through its mouth, which with its power can even knock down trees. And that on occasions, its mouth is also capable of sucking at great distances, for example, sucking an animal that is 100 meters from it. Some versions of the legend say that it acts as a protector of the water, or of the Amazon itself. It's who dominates the climate, the rains, and the flow of the rivers. When the earth needs water, it goes up to the sky and spreads like a gray stain, announcing itself with lightning and thunder, falling as rain on the ground. In this way, it makes plants grow, which serve to keep men alive. For some inhabitants of the Amazon, this snake represents the hope of eternal subsistence. However, these versions also emphasize his supernatural strength. When it moves out of the water, it leaves large trails in the jungle, with felled trees due to its size. Although it usually prefers to stay at the foot of the river, that is, where it waits for the arrival of prey, which it hypnotizes with its penetrating eyes so that it can hunt them. This legend lives on in the surroundings of the Amazon, and there are many who are still searching for the mythical Yacumama. Did you know about this creature?
How are you, horror lovers? Today we tell you the legend of Aurora Simons, an American woman who at the age of 30 became pregnant. At first she couldn't contain her joy. She was very excited to know that she would soon be a mother. However, a few weeks later she began to feel unwell and weak. She thought that it was normal, because the first months of the trimester could cause quite a bit of discomfort, but soon the situation became totally horrifying. It cost her a lot to confess it to her family, but she had no other option than to reveal that her baby was tormenting her. She claimed that the fetus spoke to her, caused her severe pain, and that she had threatened to take her life if she mentioned his existence. The family tried to reassure her by telling her that they were just imagining, the result of stress, exhaustion, and fear. The best thing she could do was stay calm, be relaxed, and wait for the months to pass, because each time the discomfort would get less. Aurora reproached them for no one believing her. Every day she was more scared and desperate. She was screaming for help, to get that baby out of her, that he was causing her unbearable pain. After speaking with psychologists who diagnosed that her mind was playing tricks on her, the woman continued to affirm that she felt that she was dying, because this pain wasn't normal. So her family decided to take her to a hospital to check and see if the child was okay. Unfortunately, Aurora lost her life on the way, a little before reaching the center. Doctors tried to revive her, but both she and the baby had died. After several tests, they discovered that all of Aurora's organs were chewed up, as if a rat was gnawing each of them to pieces. That woman had spent weeks imploring them to remove that devil from her insides, which consumed her, threatened her, and tortured her. The doctors refused to believe all those statements, but they found no explanation for the supernatural event.
Welcome back, horror lovers. Today, we bring you your daily dose of terror with another spine-chilling story. And it doesn't have to do with just any spirit or paranormal being, no. It's a story about the devil himself and his encounter with Jose. Jose was a middle-aged man who worked in the countryside and had always been a skeptic who only believed things he could verify by himself. He said that he wasn't scared of anything and that apparitions were just tales to scare children. One day, after a long day of work, Jose decided to go have a beer before heading back home. And so he went to the town's bar. He unexpectedly found his friends sitting at a table there, and they all seemed very worried. Jose sat with them, and when he asked them what was going on, they told him the reason of their worries. It seemed that many people in the town had seen the devil himself in different forms. Some saw him as a goat and others as a man in a suit. They also said that his goal was to steal people's souls. In that moment, Jose looked at all the other people at the bar and he could tell they were all talking about the same topic because of their expressions of fear and worry. Jose stood up in indignation, not believing a single word. He even insulted his friends for spreading such stupid rumors. And still feeling mad, he burst out of the bar and headed back home. He stayed angry all the way back to his house, trying to understand why people would get alarmed so easily. He thought his friends were better than that and felt very disappointed when he saw that wasn't the case. However, as Jose walked through one of the streets near his house, he heard a baby crying. He looked everywhere, but couldn't find the source of that crying. He got so worried that he went out of the street and into the mountain. There, Jose saw a baby crying. The baby was completely alone and nobody was around them. He ran towards the baby, grabbed him, and rocked him in his arms until he calmed down. He decided to take the baby home, cursing whoever had abandoned him there. However, as Jose kept on walking, he started to notice how the baby was getting heavier and heavier, until he had to put him on the floor again. And when Jose looked at the baby's face more closely, the little one started laughing. And then, the baby started to talk. "Daddy, look at my fangs." Jose could not comprehend what was happening. The eyes of the baby turned red and his small fangs grew as horns also started to appear on his forehead. Many say that Jose tried to run away to get back home, but never reached the door as the devil himself had captured him. Meanwhile, others say that Jose went insane and spent the rest of his life locked up in his house, terrified of the outside world. The Sodder case was a real case and one of the great unsolved mysteries out there. It happened on Christmas 1945, and to this day, nobody knows what really happened. It all happened in Fayetteville, North Carolina. George, Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children had just finished opening Christmas presents. Then they went to sleep. The 10th Sodder brother, the eldest, was not with them because he was working in the army. It was 12:30 in the morning when the phone rang. Jenny, scared, got up to answer, and on the other end, a voice asked for a stranger. In the background, she could hear laughter and glasses clinking. The mother hung up the phone and went back to her bed. Later, she woke up again with the sound of something falling on the ceiling. Not noticing anything strange, she fell asleep again. An hour later, the Sodder's mother awoke, noticing heavy smoke. The house was burning. She, her husband, and 4 of their children, Marion, George Jr., John, and baby Sylvia, managed to escape. Marion, the oldest daughter, ran to the neighbor's house to call the fire department, but they didn't respond and the neighbors had to come out to help. While this was happening, George and Jenny were trying to rescue the rest of their children, who had stayed inside the house, but the smoke and flames made it impossible to enter. Professional help arrived at 8 a.m. and it was determined that the fire had been caused by a problem with the house's wiring. The couple assured that they hadn't had any such failure, and theories began to emerge that someone wanted to kill them. Firefighters assumed that the 5 Sodder children who hadn't made it out had died in the fire. However, no remains of them were found anywhere. They shared the theory that perhaps the fire had decomposed all of the corpses. But the morgue experts assured the family that it was totally impossible, because studying the fire in the time that had passed, there should be bone remains. But the mystery doesn't end there, because a few months before the fire, a mysterious insurance agent approached the house. George rejected his policy proposal, and the man warned him that his house could burn down and his children could be destroyed. And then he added that all this could happen by criticizing Mussolini. The Sodders lived in a community with many Italian immigrants, and one of the theories suggests that George may have had a problem with the mafia, and his children were kidnapped and the house burned down as a form of revenge. In 1968, more than 20 years later, Jenny received a photo in the letterbox. In the image appeared a man, and he claimed to be one of her missing sons, Louis. However, they never managed to find him or identified who had sent that photograph. The children's mother even carried out experiments with animal bones, burning them at high temperatures with a duration similar to that of the fire. And the results were the same. There was always some leftovers. The woman spent her whole life trying to find the truth. However, in 1989, she died without knowing what really happened to her children. It was the year 1908 at the Merino Street in Puebla, Mexico. In that location was a pawn shop known as the Villa Trading House. The owner was one of the richest men in the entire country and was famous for taking advantage of people and for his rudeness. The government backed him up by turning a blind eye to his scams so long as they received a portion of the profits. And with their help, he managed to become rich at the expense of the poorest of people. He would take hold of their few belongings and would then charge them insane interest rates. And he wasn't just a bad person, he was pretty negligent with his physical appearance too. He was bald and overweight, boasting a fat and round body. And not only that, but everyone who visited his pawn shop would be shocked when seeing his fat hands, covered in thick and black hair. However, the man was not ashamed of his hands and would constantly wear on them and flaunt many golden rings with precious stones. Everyone in the town hated that man, but many had to endure his scams in order to pay their debts. And every day, people who passed in front of his business would mumble against him, saying things like, "One of these days, I hope your hand just withers." However, him and his wife from inside the pawn shop would laugh at their insults while flaunting the many coins they had earned. And then, a few years later, the owner of that pawn shop passed away. His wife bought the cheapest coffin she could find and moved to the city with all his money. Nobody came to his funeral. Only the priest in charge of the ceremony and the gravedigger. And then, at midnight on the night of the funeral, something started to come out of the man's grave. It was a dark hand covered not only in hair but also jewels. It started to crawl on the ground, getting to the streets and terrifying everyone who would bump into it. The hand would climb onto their faces like a spider and shove its fingers in their eyes until tearing them out of their eye sockets. And then it would strangle its victims until killing them, who would fall to the floor with a horrified expression and their necks bruised. Hours later, the hand went back to its grave to rest along the man's corpse. But that would not be the last time it would come out. People still say that if you are wandering around the beautiful city of Puebla in the wee hours of the night, you'll be in great danger of being attacked by the fuzzy hand. How are you doing, horror lovers? Today, we bring you a terrifying legend from El Salvador, the story of La Descarnada. Many have affirmed to have seen this being, and today we'll share with you her story. In a town lived a renowned warrior and his wife. She was sterile, so she couldn't have children with her husband, and due to the customs and beliefs at the time, she was despised by the community and they wanted her to be banished. However, despite those intolerant traditions, the warrior used his influence so she could keep living in the town. Then one day, the warrior was called to fight in a war and had to leave his wife alone. And shortly after, the wife noticed that she was actually pregnant. She wanted to tell her husband the great news and wrote him a letter. On the way to send it, many women who hated the wife for being infertile surrounded her and beat her up so badly that she ended up losing the baby. Humiliated and moribund, she looked at the sky and begged the gods to help her take revenge. And thus, the gods granted her the power to remove her skin at will to scare others and then go back to normal so she could blend in. She turned into an evil being who would seduce men and then scare them to death. This way, she managed to end the life of all the children of those women who hurt her so badly, making them go insane and feel the pain she felt herself. Many of those women ended up taking their own lives after that horrible tragedy. After some time, the warrior came back home and found that his wife had changed completely. She was no longer the innocent and joyful woman he had said goodbye to. Now she was constantly surrounded by a disturbing darkness. Then one night, the warrior saw her removing her own skin and transforming into that grotesque creature that looked more like a zombie. This horrified the warrior, who decided to throw salt to her skin so it could never close again. And the salt produced such an intense pain in the woman that she screamed in agony until she finally died for good. From then on, she was known as the Flayed Woman. Her spirit was sentenced to wander around the world of the living for all of eternity. And the legend says that to this day, the Flayed Woman keeps seducing men and making them fall into her traps. Chile has many horror legends. Today, we travel to the island of Chiloé, located in the southern part of the country, to meet one of the most popular mythical characters in the region. The Truku is a mythological being 80 centimeters tall, with an ugly face similar to that of an ogre, but with a special and sweet look that manages to attract the women who see him. He has no feet, his legs end at the ankles, and he wears a suit with a hat made of quinileja, which is a climbing plant that grows in the jungles of Chiloé. He always carries a stone axe with him. Depending on the versions, it is said that when he meets a woman in the forest, he uses the axe as if it were a cane so as not to frighten her. Although others affirm that in addition to the axe, he carries a twisted cane called pahueldum. Legend has it that he lives in the surroundings of the houses of the Chilotes to observe the movements of women. He only persecutes those who go alone. He never acts when there are witnesses. He climbs high into trees to get a wide view and keep an eye on his victims. When he sees a woman he likes in the forest, he goes down quickly and hits the tree 3 times with an axe to scare her. When the girl recovers from her fright, Truku comes to her side and gently blows her breath. The victim, unable to resist his charm, falls into a deep sleep without putting up a fight. Upon awakening from the spell, the woman returns home completely confused, not knowing what happened. As months go by, the woman's body begins to experience changes, until after 9 months she has a child, product of the spell of the strange little man. Sometimes Truku may be interested in a woman, but he can't get close to her because she doesn't go out into the woods alone. When this happens, the being first communicates his presence to the girl by depositing his yellow droppings in front of the door of her house. Later, he announces his visit with sensual dreams, in which he transforms into a handsome young man to magically convince her. So little by little, he makes his way until he manages to enter through a door or window, pretending to be the man she dreams of. It is said that if the family realizes these facts, they should take precautions, since the Trauco could enter transformed into a bush or quinileja, along with the rest of the branches or firewood used in the house, to wait for night and grab his victim. In some areas of Chiloé, when mothers suspect that this being is prowling their house, they leave a handful of sand on the table at night. The Trauco is attracted to counting the grains of sand, and in this way, he forgets about the girl of the house. With the first light of dawn, he disappears with fear of being surprised by many people. So this would be a way to protect from him. Another way to keep it away would be to place excrement on the woman's body, because he's very neat with what he touches. Although we think the sand is enough. Many people in the area really believed these myths and legends and claimed to be pregnant with Trauco, although there were also many who used it to cover up infidelity or an unwanted pregnancy. What do you think? Hey there, horror lovers! In Argentina, there is a legend about a statue that was on Almafuerte Street in Paraná. It is said that there, years ago, a man made a pact with the devil. If the demon caused him to win the lottery prize, he would give him his soul and make a sculpture of his image for all to venerate. The demon fulfilled his part of the bargain, so the man began with his offering. However, shortly before he was finished, the town's residents heard a great cry of pain and suffering coming from his house. Nobody knew what happened to him, but his body appeared paralyzed with the same posture as the statue. The Argentines believed that the soul of the man had been locked up inside the said figure. It is said that some tried to throw it into the river, but shortly after it reappeared in the same place and without any damage. The following years, all those who walked along Almafuerte Avenue felt intimidated when passing in front of the house where the stone demon was. No one dared to throw it back or move it. They didn't want to have a tragic end like its owner. The statue was white, the size of an adult, with horns, a pointed tail, and a pointed beard. He had a wicked laugh and a chilling look. The left leg was kneeling, and the other served to support the arm on the same side. Some say that with the other hand he held his chin, although others affirm that he held a flute, which gave him a certain resemblance to a faun. The years went by, and in 1965, in the House of the Devil, a restaurant was installed. The place was called El Galeto de Oro, and hundreds of people used to go there for dinner, close to the disturbing gaze of the devil. The owner of the restaurant denied that this figure was related to a diabolical pact, but without a doubt, that legend attracted many customers who wanted to see this sculpture with their own eyes. When the building was bought by other owners, the statue disappeared. People say that they removed it from there, and in its place, they placed a fountain of holy water. There are no photos of the figure that aroused 1,000 stories and nightmares in the residents of Paraná, but those who came to see it still remember it. Do you think the statue was destroyed? Or that it still remains somewhere with the soul of the man who made the pact with the devil? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life horror videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode.